A very warm welcome, people. I'm sure you can hear from my voice that I have a very nasty cold, that has broken down the voice. But I want to assure you that I'm doing everything to deal with it. And because I gave my word that I will connect every Friday, that's why I know that I'm obliged to do this. It's good to connect with you all again, especially after the extended episode 7 that lasted through 6 videos. Once again, this is my channel as Pastor Nike, and my name is Nike Ayola. If this is the first time of joining us, this is a relationship enhancement platform where your questions are addressed by using the Word of God, which is the Bible. And the question for episode 8, which is where we are, is this. Do you have an obligation or a right to demand integrity from your spouse about a promise they made to you before marriage? And how often is too much to remind them of that broken promise? So this is the summary of the question. And as usual, I would like to begin from the perspective of the ideal, that is, God's standard in this kind of situation. The truth is that with God, everything rises and falls on character. Our ability to give and keep our word is important. This is because God and His word are one and the same. And for us as humans, our words cannot be separated from our person. In a nutshell, we are our words. And Jesus tells us that every word we speak will be accounted for in Matthew chapter 12 and verse 36. If you think about it, faith is only possible because it's placed in God who keeps His word all of the time. If God failed to keep His word even once, then our faith will forever be on shaky legs. I think it's a quote by John Maxwell that says in summary that character is higher than competence, and he's right. I imagine that no one will hire a capable person who cannot be trusted. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 37 from the New Living Translation says, just say a simple yes, I will, or no, I won't. Anything beyond this is from the evil one. Also, chapter 5 and verse 12 of the book of James in the Passion Translation tells us, above all, we must be those who never need to verify our speech as truthful by swearing by the heavens or the earth or any other oath. But instead, we must be so full of integrity that our yes or no is convincing enough and we do not stumble into hypocrisy. God expects us to be full of integrity. This means that we cannot afford to make flippant promises. Not at all. Now, please remember that what I have said so far is about the ideal situation. But the honest truth is that most of us are still very far away from this ideal. So, in talking about the reality of this question, I think the best place to begin is by examining how this couple possibly got to this point. It's possible that the promise could have been made in the heat of passion. At a time when desire could have made a man or woman promise an arm and a leg. It could also be that the spouse promised with hope, Hope that, maybe the promise will be forgotten, or that the issue might not matter much after the wedding. Or even from a place of poor appreciation of their strength or their commitment. So now that reality has hit, it has become apparent that they either spoke too soon or that they promised what they cannot deliver. It's also possible that this person, that is the person asking the question, obtained the promise by duress or by cashing in on the intender's vulnerable moment. Now, if that happened, then it's obvious that the spouse who promised would have known right from the beginning that he or she was never going to keep that promise anyway, but they spoke so that the wedding could go on or so that they could marry their spouse. Now, while all these are possible scenarios, the bottom line is still integrity. We must learn to never make a promise or even a threat, especially when dealing with children, that we don't intend to fulfill or enforce. In fact, the moment we give our word, we have moved from intention to integrity. The Bible tells us to say yes or no. And some of us don't understand that no, that word no, is not an evil or dirty word. But it's still better to say no when you are uncertain than to commit yourself to something that will eventually become a forever burden. Now, in suggesting what can be done, I do think that this spouse has both the obligation and the right to prompt the other person to keep the promise that they made. An obligation is a duty, a responsibility, and in this case, if it is something that is beneficial to the one who promised, I believe that this spouse should keep on pushing until it happens. It could be something life-threatening or something that is destiny impacting, which makes it imperative on this spouse who asks the question to follow through in ensuring that that promise is kept. A right, on the other hand, refers to something that affects you, not the spouse who is making that promise. So, if your spouse made you a promise, now let me say, for example, to buy you a car after you got married, you have the right to demand that they keep their word. However, many times, love means not insisting on your rights, especially where a true appreciation of the circumstances show that there is a willingness, but the necessary resources or ability to carry out the promised action is not there. Moreover, if it was for something for which a promise was enough, it means that it probably is not something you cannot live without. Now, what I mean by that is this. If you accepted a promise before you got married, then it cannot be something that is immaterial or sacrosanct to your relationship. And so, you may not want to erect walls between the two of you by insisting on your right. Let me wrap up this episode by answering the second part of the question. How often is too much to remind the spouse of a broken or unfulfilled promise? Ephesians 4 and verse 15 in the Common English Bible says, "Instead, by speaking the truth with love, let's grow in every way into Christ." And verse 2 of the same Ephesians 4 tells us to always be humble and gentle, be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults because of your love. This is from the New Living Translation. So, corrections, complaints, observations, and reminders should be done in love in all our relationships, but especially in marriage. We all react differently to pressure. This is where the knowledge of your spouse becomes the most important. Some may yield, while some others simply double down and refuse to budge. So you need to know the person that you married. Remember that with each subsequent reminder comes a loss of potency or impact. So saying it all the time eventually becomes counterproductive. So my advice on reminding your spouse about the outstanding promise is threefold. The first is this: do it in love. Secondly, do it sparingly. And then, never do it in the presence of others or in a public place. I want to thank you for spending time with me on this episode. I trust that this episode has been a blessing and an addition to you. So please remember to like and share this channel with all your friends and contacts as we continue to be our brothers and sisters keepers. And don't forget to post your comments on the channel and send your questions by email to askpastornike@gmail.com. Once again, I apologize for the cracked voice. See you all next Friday and be blessed always.